want to start with, is Christianity, this section, is Christianity a copy of ancient Egyptian or Kemetic religion? And we will start this time with a 20-minute clock with Dr. Bantu.
All right, welcome back, everybody. As to the second question, is Bisrat a copy of ancient Egyptian or Kemetic religion? There's really 2 points that I want to make about this, and I'll just show some examples to kind of explain this. Right? I noticed we had the same picture, we also have the picture of the conversion of the temple of Philae to a Christian imagery, and the point that I want to make with that is, and why I show that, is that there's 2 simple points I want to make in response to this question. Number one is that ancient Egyptian practitioners of traditional religion and Nasrawi alike did not see their faith as the same or an imitation of one another. But they both had a very clear sense that these religions were different, that were fundamentally distinct. There was nobody saying that this is an imitation or a copy. That's number one, and that's what the picture is meant to describe. Like, otherwise, why would Coptic Christians want to carve out crosses and not see traditional symbols? Unless they saw it as a different faith that they want to disassociate themselves from, not copy. The second point I want to make is that the question itself actually betrays a certain modern myopia. And what I mean by that is that to ask the question, is Bisrat a copy of Kemet, is an inherently modern question that, especially when talking about in an ancient context, is actually an inappropriate question to ask. It's not the right way to think about it. People in the ancient world did not think in these terms. People in the ancient world did not think in terms of, hey, you guys are copying us. That seems similar to what we're doing, and therefore it's inferior, or therefore it's a copy. People didn't talk like that. They didn't think like that. That's a modern invented idea that finds no resonance in the ancient world. That's my 2 points, and I'm going to just show you some evidence of that. First of all, and we were talking about violence, right? This is where I'm going to flesh that out a little bit more. But I want to make a point that I'm not sure was clear. I said it already, but I'm going to say it again because I'm concerned it might not have been clear. The question that we were asked first is Bisrat a white man's religion? We were not asked, is Bisrat immune to violence? Is Kemetic religion immune to violence? Is any religion immune to violence? Is there zero evidence of violence being done by those who claim to be Nasrawi? That was not the question. The question is this religion from the white man? That was the question. So let's stay on point and actually focus on that question. And the answer, again, as I've shown you, is no. Because there were examples of Nasrawi completely outside of the Roman Empire and even inside of it that were resisting the Roman Empire. But there was definitely violence, but that's not what we're asking. That's not what we're talking about. And that's not even what we're talking about now. Now we're talking about, is it a copy? And so what I want to show you to show that, no, it's not a copy. No one in the ancient context thought that way. This is an example from a Coptic Egyptian Nasrawi theologian named Shenouda of Atrib. And this is his monastery. And it was a place where Shenouda would give public sermons where Egyptians, predominantly Nasrawi, but also practitioners of traditional religion as well, would be present. And in this public mixed setting, Shenouda addresses a particular practitioner of traditional Egyptian religion named Gesius. Gesius was a wealthy landowner, an Egyptian, who lived in the city of Pantopolis, which was close to Atrib and close to Sohag, where Shenouda's monastery was. And he is publicly addressing Gesius and talking about the differences between their religions. He says, the one whom I found in the temple of Atrib, and this would be a traditional Egyptian temple, so Christians did not stamp it out because it was still going on. Are y'all hearing that? Like, Christians did not eradicate traditional Egyptian religion. I don't think y'all understand it. Like, Christians did not eradicate Egyptian religion. It was still going on. And we see that from 5th century sources right here, that Shenouda is addressing a traditional practitioner of traditional religion. And there's still a temple. Egyptians are still going to it, and they're still praying and sacrificing and practicing the traditional religion. It's still going on. He says, the one whom I found in the temple of a tree, worshiping Satan and pouring out libations to him, and Shenouda is polemically, and that means like, kind of argumentatively equating traditional Egyptian gods with Satan. He's saying he poured out, Satan and poured out libations to him. He scattered roses, peach branches, bunches of grape leaves, and other fragrant plants in that place. That defiled one, he's talking about Gesius now, immediately spat at him, being Jesus, when I advised him to believe in Jesus. And he blasphemily said that the great deeds that the Lord of all, Jesus, did Apollonius of Tyana and Plato did as well. So what Gesius is saying right now, as Shenouda is trying to convince him to become a Christian, is Gesius is basically saying, I'm good on Jesus because I prefer Apollonius of Tyana and Plato to Jesus. So I'm good. I kind of like my own religion. And this kind of demonstrates what I'm talking about, how people in the ancient world thought. Deities were often localized to particular nations, particular cities, and they were often associated with particular elements of nature or different things they might want, like kind of incantations or prayers for healing or for fertility or for crops growing, all these different things, right? And also they were often mixed and often associated with other gods from other places, and this happened in Egypt as well as everywhere else in the ancient world. And so Christianity is not only not a copy of Egyptian religion, it is actually quite distinct, not only from Egyptian religion, but also from all ancient religion. And here's the other thing. Notice that Gesius, who's an Egyptian, he associates himself with not with traditional Egyptian gods, but with Plato. So at a time where Egyptians who had been colonized by the Ptolemies already for several centuries, even before the time of Bisrat, had already begun to associate and blend together Roman gods with Egyptian gods and began to patron different Roman and Egyptian religion. But notice here that it's Shenouda who writes in the Egyptian language and actually embraces a traditional, unique form of Christianity local to Egypt that was oppressed by the Roman Empire. So there is a distinction when we talk about Bisrat, if we're talking about the perverted, oppressing Roman version of it, or the version of it that grew in Egypt, which I've already said, which itself has issues with violence. But one thing it cannot be accused of is being an extension of the white man or the Roman Empire, because it was oppressed by the Roman Empire, not only before Constantine, but after Constantine as well, from Arian leaders like Constantius and from Chalcedonian. This was the Council of Chalcedon in 451, where the Roman Church decided that Jesus is one person with two natures, one hypostasis, two physis. This, the Egyptian church did not believe in. It did not make sense to their Egyptian context. They were saying Jesus is one person and one nature. They rejected this doctrine, and they were vehemently oppressed by the Roman Empire. So this idea that the Roman Empire and the Egyptian church were together is completely unsubstantiated in sources. They were actually at odds with each other. The Roman Empire sent in soldiers and priests together to go in and enforce Roman Christianity in Egyptian monasteries and killed Egyptian Christian monks and priests. So they were at odds with each other. And at a time when Egyptians who were Nasrawi were actually resisting the Roman Empire, Egyptians who practiced traditional religion were actually imbibing the white man's Platonic philosophy. This is another example, again, of demonstrating this point I'm trying to make about why it's not the right way to think about it, to think this is copying that. That was actually what ancient folk loved to do. Not copy, but complement. The idea of copy, again, is a modern idea. And it's not respected by any scholarship today, whatever their faith is. This is a rejected idea. It was understood in the ancient world to combine different religions. If different deities work for you, if they can bring the result you want, then yeah, pray to them, pray to them. This is an example of a 7th century healing charm that was inscribed on a particular seal, where the name of Jesus and Horus are invoked together, side by side. this particular person, who's a practitioner of Egyptian religion, not a Nasrawi, invokes the name of Horus and Jesus together. And he says, Jesus Horus, speaking to Jesus Horus. And he has this traditional story about Horus and Isis creating a falcon to heal someone from sickness. And it's just a general healing seal. Jesus Horus, the son of Isis, went upon a mountain in order to rest. He performed his music, set his nets, and captured a falcon, a wild pelican. He cut it without a knife, cooked it without fire, and ate it without salt on it. He had pain, and the area around his navel hurt him. And he wept with loud weeping, saying, today I am bringing my mother Isis to me. I want a demon. This is Horus Jesus asking for a demon. Nasrawi folks ain't cool with that. they would never have prayed this. I want a demon so that I may send him to my mother Isis. The spirit went upon the mountain to Heliopolis and found his mother Isis wearing an iron crown and stoking a copper oven. Isis said to him, even if you did not find me and did not find my name, the true name that the sun bears to the west and the moon bears to the east, and that is borne by the 6 propitiatory stars under the sun, you would summon the 300 vessels that are around the navel. Let every sickness and every difficulty and every pain that is in the belly of In, and I think the translator was unsure about the name of this particular person, the child of In, stop at this moment. Let every sickness stop at this moment. I am the one who calls. The Lord Jesus is the one who grants healing. So again, notice the complete association here from an Egyptian traditional religious practitioner, or what people sometimes call pagan. I don't want to use that word. I don't want to be offensive. But what other people would call pagans. Notice the complete understanding that actually Jesus and Horus can go together. It sounds kind of similar to the traditional Egyptian folks. So we can pray to Jesus and Horus at the same time. There wasn't this sense in which we don't want Jesus because he's a copy of Horus. Actually, they said, that sounds similar to Horus, so we're going to pray to both of them. So this is an example of what I'm showing, that this idea of it copying is a modern idea that has been inserted into the ancient world. Egyptian deities had interaction with other cultures, and they merged and mingled and were influenced by and influenced other religions. This was a part of the ancient world. This is why during the Ptolemaic dynasty going forward, notice that Egyptian Christians, Nasrawi, were persecuted by the Roman emperor. But Egyptian traditional religious practitioners were not. Think about that. Practitioners of a traditional Egyptian religion during the Roman colonial period were not persecuted by the Roman Empire, but the Christians were. Why is that? Because traditional Egyptian religion is actually a lot more similar to Roman religion than Christianity is. Christianity is actually the more unique one. When Rome colonized Egypt, it's like, oh yeah, you guys been praying to Isis. Well, we pray to Serapis. Let's just kind of put those together. They're kind of similar. So we can pray to Serapis and Isis at the same time. But who was really getting on people's nerves were the Nasrawi in the Roman Empire and the Egyptian Empire and the Persian Empire and in China and in India, all of which were saying, we worship no God but Jesus. That is the more unique posture to take in the ancient world. To say that our religion is the only right one and we refuse to render worship to no other God but Jesus is very rare in the ancient world. Very rare, with the only exception predominantly of Judaism. And that's why Jewish people were hated as well, because they said there is only one God. And Romans did not like that. And to Egyptians, that didn't make sense, because this is actually, if Nasrawi would have presented Christianity, the Bisrat, like this, they probably would have been okay with it. Because it's like, yeah, you could believe in Horus and Jesus. But the Nasrawi predominantly, this is a very rare exception. Most contemporaneous evidence from this time period shows that the majority of Nasrawi were against this kind of thing. And again, like I said in the first point, vehemently distinguished themselves from traditional religion in ways like this. Again, the practices, like we read in Shenouda, and also in this homily attributed to Athanasius, where it says, some of them, talking about, again, his word, not mine, pagans, some of them ablute their children in polluted water and water from the arena, from the theater, and moreover, they pour all over themselves water and incantations spoken over it, and they break their clay pots, claiming it repels the evil eye. Some tie amulets on their children, handcrafted by men, those men who provide a place for the dwelling of demons, while others anoint themselves with oil that is evil and incantations and such things that they tie on their heads and necks. Again, notice the differentiation. Also, again, remember when I said I'm going to show you evidence that violence was happening in both directions? Here is evidence for that. This is from a Syriac text, not a Roman text, but by a Syriac Nasrawi historian who also in the 5th century was being persecuted by the Roman emperor and had very negative opinions about the Roman Christianity. So again, there's a distinction and a difference. You got to be clear what you're talking about when you talk about Christianity. Because as I said it before, but I just think I need to say it again, I am not here today defending Roman Christianity. I am not here defending crusading Christianity. I am not here defending slave castle building, colonizing Christianity that takes Native Americans from their home in mission schools and that tries to build borders and separates people from their families. That is not the Christianity that I am a part of. That's not what I'm defending here today. I am talking about the Bisrat that has been among black and brown and yellow people from the beginning. That wasn't perfect. That had issues itself. But it wasn't from the white man. Again, that's what we're talking about. And it wasn't a copy. Nobody thought like that. And also, there was violence going both ways. So this story tells about a particular man, a person, an Egyptian young man who was a student in a traditional religious school that, again, was a mixture of Roman and Egyptian religion. Notice again that in the 5th century, really during all late antiquity, Egyptians who still prayed to the traditional gods were actually a lot more whitewashed than the Christians were. Again, Perelius is a student in a grammatical school in Alexandria in Egypt that's mixing together traditional Egyptian religion with Roman religion, learning Platonic grammarian rhetorical skill, and he becomes a Christian. And this enrages the other Egyptians and they beat him up. Egyptians who still practice traditional religion beat this young man who chose to leave the Egyptian religion and become a Nasrawi. He got beat up. So, Nasrawi, yes, do we have things that we need to admit that we've done? Black and brown and ancient and modern, yes. But folks who practice traditional Egyptian religion back then also have things that they need to speak about. So this talks about his conversion. It says, I walked up. Actually, I don't want to go over again, so I'm going to skip this one. That's the main point I want to bring out of this. Again, is that you added a traditional Egyptian person who practiced, an Egyptian young man who practiced traditional religion, but that was very mixed up with Roman religion. And then he left that, became a Nasrawi, and he was savagely beat by other Egyptians because they didn't like it. Another example of this, Pachomius. This is one of the first people who invented monasticism, something that Europeans later stole by Benedict, and in Irish and Scottish and English monasteries, they got that from Egypt. And one of the first monastic communities was started by Pachomius, who was an Egyptian. He was born and raised in Thebes, which was at the time the capital of ancient pharaonic Egypt. He was born and raised in traditional Egyptian religion. And also, get this point, Pachomius was born in the late 200s. And this text shows us that he became a Christian, a Nasrawi, at a very young age, as a child. So that means that around the year 300, when Pachomius was a young man and he was a Nasrawi, and he had chosen freely to reject his traditional religion that his parents raised him in, at that time period, what was happening in the Roman Empire, of which Egypt was a colony? Christians were being killed by Diocletian. This is before Constantine. Emperor Diocletian enacted the worst persecution almost of any in the whole Roman Empire and was massacring Christians. So at a time, again, this is the opposite of the claim that this came from the white man, this came from the Roman Empire. To the contrary, Pachomius, an Egyptian born and raised in the traditional Egyptian capital, born and raised in traditional Egyptian religion, he would have been safer. As I already have showed you, it was cool to be a traditional Egyptian religion, traditional Roman, whatever, played all different gods. What was not cool at this time was being a Nasrawi. That could cost your life. That was what was more unique. And yet, Pachomius heard the word of God, and he believed in the Bisrat, and he began to follow Yeshua of Nazareth. And this shows, again, the distinction between Bisrat and Egyptian Christianity. He says, as a child, Pachomius' parents took him with them somewhere along on the river, the Nile, to sacrifice to those creatures that are in the water. So apparently this author, the Christians, the Nasrawi in this time period are perceiving of this as something that Egyptian traditional folks do. When those creatures raised their eyes in the water, they saw the boy, took fright, and fled away. Then the one who was presiding over the sacrifice shouted, chase the enemy of the gods out of here so that they will cease to be angry with us. For because of him, they do not come up. At once his parents reproached him, why are the gods angry with you? The boy signed after God and went away home. Another day, they brought him with them to the temple where they were going to offer a sacrifice. After the sacrifice, they gave him a drink of wine they had poured out for the demons. But at once he vomited it out vigorously, and his parents were distressed about him because their gods were hostile to him. This is the picture we get of contemporary sources, that Bisrat was not a copy, it was very distinct, and that was actually unique, and that Egyptian traditional religion was actually more Romanized.
I need to say something here. I have followed this brother very clearly and very intentionally, and I think that some of what he may be doing here is intentionally deceptive. He is merging periods of time that should not be merged. He started to talk to you about Diocletian massacring Christians and said, well, how could that be an example of how Rome is controlling Christianity? He's not telling you that that happens before Rome decides to control Christianity. He knows this. You don't. Don't let him flim-flam you, family. Regardless of the tradition you belong to, you should be inured against that is what is not true. He knows this. He's talked to you very eloquently about Constantine. Diocletian is when? Before or after? What? Say that?
Well, you go ahead.
No, go ahead, say it.
No, you go ahead.
I'm going to let you say it.
I'm going to let you go ahead and talk.
Okay. I wonder why. Because he's before. He is giving you Donald Trump with a Native American headdress because he knows you haven't done the scholarship he's done. Dear brother Dr. Bantu, I have. I'm sitting here listening to you, knowing that what you're saying is deceptive. By the way, you have given us lots of great slides with citations on them. The thing that I'm confused about is it sounds sometimes like your citations actually support my argument, not yours. He shows you that someone is using Heru and Jesus and saying, oh, these are similar. One is thousands of years earlier. So to that practitioner, something sounded similar. And then he says that people in the ancient world do not actually say, I'm going somewhere, family. I'm going right into my presentation, but I have to inoculate you against some of what you've heard. One of the things that is happening here is that he's making claims, no citations, by the way. He just says in the ancient world, people actually didn't say, you're copying us. I'm sure, I heard the brother talk about St. Augustine. He knows this quote. Don't be disingenuous. That which is known as the Christian religion existed amongst the ancients and never did not exist from the beginning of the human race until the time when Christ came in the flesh, at which time the true religion, which already existed, began to be called Christianity. He is actually saying, yeah, the thing that we're saying about Jesus, y'all already been doing. He knows this. This is someone he would call an African church father. That's what he's doing. That's being disingenuous. At least acknowledge the contradictions in what you are actually studying. And then what about this one? Justin Martyr, another important church father. When we say that Jesus Christ was produced without sexual union, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended to heaven, we propound nothing new or different from what you believe regarding those who you call the sons of Jupiter. For when we say that Dionysus arose again and ascended to heaven, is it not evidence the devil has imitated the prophecy? Yes, they do recognize they're copying something. This dude is actually saying, guess what? The devil has a time machine. He knew Jesus was coming, so he went thousands of years before to seed you so you wouldn't believe in Jesus. They certainly understand they're copying something. He knows these. Let's be really clear about something here. The Christian tradition is not a carbon copy of the Kemetic tradition. On that point, we will agree. In fact, what we see is a tradition that is stolen, then filtered through the social mores of another group of people. It's not exactly the same. If it was exactly the same, we wouldn't even be having this debate. That's a foolish argument to make. And if you thought I was going to stand here and follow that red herring, then I guess you're disappointed. I'm going to talk to you about misogyny in the Bible. That's one of the things that makes it anti-African. And so clearly this is not a carbon copy of the Kemetic tradition. Clearly. And so I want you to understand that what we have to do here is we have to actually put things in historical context, and we have to actually explain that half of his citation, he's saying I didn't show a lot of citations. By the way, you have to look at the screen. You can't just sit there, because often I speak in the citations on the screen. But let me say to you, I don't need to put any up because you're just giving them to me. So I don't need to. Thank you. Really? I mean, how could you say that someone is following Heru and Jesus, and then he even talks about someone who is worshiping a tree and says that's the Kemetic tradition. In the temple of Altrio. What temple is that? He said that. I guess some of you who don't know would just assume he was correct. Maybe he doesn't realize that doesn't make sense. I hope he does. As a practitioner and a historian who has practiced for 30 years and studied for longer, I'm going to tell you, I don't even know what he's referring to there. And then he gives you someone who got beat up. One dude got beat up? That's proof of violence? Really? What kind of violence are you looking for? I hope you understand that that does not equate. I had a lot to talk about here, y'all. To this. Now, this woman, by the way, he says what did he say? They converted the space. Once again, if you came here on Sunday and we converted your church and Dr. Mason was missing, you wouldn't say, well, I guess we'll just be Kemetic today. How does he describe this as a bloodless transition? Take a look at this woman here. Her name is Hypatia. Say Hypatia with me. Now, Hypatia is likely a biracial woman. I don't have time to go into that. And she was practicing a tradition that was closely linked to the Roman, Greek, and Kemetic tradition. There are many similarities there. You're correct about that. And one of the reasons why there's similarities is because the Greeks and the Romans took from Kemet. And so then Christianity is influenced directly by Kemet and then indirectly by the mystery traditions. That's how Christianity is cobbled together from other people's traditions. And that's why the folks that you were hearing had to try to explain it away. So he's saying that Christianity is very different from those traditions. True. Because they say that their savior is a literal person. That's the difference. I don't believe a dude with a bird head is going to visit me tomorrow. I don't. But you may believe that a guy with holes in his hands would. I don't mean that to be disrespectful. I'm trying to help you understand one of the differences. So let's look at Hypatia. Hypatia was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a practitioner of traditions that were much closely linked to the ancient traditions. When the Christians told her to stop and she refused, they took her from the temple teaching space, stoned her, and then carved the skin and her flesh off her bones with seashells and paraded her remains in the street. That's how Egypt converts. Why is he continuing to make this sound like it's bloodless? He knows the story of Hypatia. Look at his face. Yeah, so why is he doing that? Stop it. Why are you doing that? You don't have to do that to win this section. Because I'm going to call you on it every day, all day. Is the tradition of Kemet the original form? Yes. But just as if you have a copy of a copy of a copy, it loses its clarity and focus. Just as it becomes filtered through the traditions of other nations and other peoples, it loses its clarity and focus. So carbon copy, no, but copy, yes. The Pope knows that. That's why he's actually paying homage to a black Madonna. That's why you see these all over. And I know that you're going to say, I know he's going to say, that's Rome, that has nothing to do with me. I want you to hear this again because he's ignoring it. The way that this tradition gets into Africa, particularly in the countries he's talking about, is that Rome conquers Egypt, and then they weren't able to conquer Nubia, but then an Ethiopian man is transitioned by his tutor. I didn't say that I didn't imply an inappropriate relationship. I did not do that. Someone in the audience said that. I didn't say that. I'm just saying if you sent your child to school, if you sent your child to school and someone came back and said, I'm a member of the Nation of Islam now. Some of y'all would be like, oh, hell no. You know what I'm saying. I'm saying it's inappropriate for an adult to do that to a child. I'm not saying anything else occurred. I have no proof of that. And then that man actually transitions his country and conquers Nubia to create another Christian nation. Rome to Egypt, Egypt to Ethiopia, Ethiopia to Nubia. That's what happened. All day long, you can't pretend that didn't happen. And he even suggested I didn't do a citation. I'll do that later. This is the original Austin Heru. How can you see that and not recognize that you are seeing a copy? And in fact, I do not have the time to go through all of the similarities and myths. But very quickly, I'm going to run through this so quickly, y'all. Some of y'all will catch it. Some of you watch the video. Now look, you're going to see archetypes for Jesus within the stories of Heru and the stories of Asar. It's not in one place, because remember, it's not a carbon copy, but a copy nonetheless. That's what occurs. So we see Heru as the son of God. You know very well that he's the son of Asar, right? Do you know this? Okay. If I have to give you a citation for that, you're not equipped to hear this conversation. Does that make sense? That is just evident and known. He also was born of a virgin and displayed in a crib outside of temples. Citation. The Egyptians have consecrated up to this day the childbirth of a virgin and the nativity of her son, who was exposed in crib to the adoration of the people. This is from the Chronicle Pascal from actually the 6th century CE. Citation. So that you should understand that people understood that that was happening in Kemetic temples. In fact, Heru is usually born on December 25th. Here's another citation. Every year, the temples of Horus presented to worshipers in midwinter, on or about December 25th, a scenic model of the birth of Horus. The Roman writer Macrobius adds to that the young god was a symbol for the rebirth of the sun at that date. The whole world by the year 1 AD was familiar with the Egyptian statues of pictures of Isis and her divine maid Horus in her arms. That's Joseph McCade from the Story of Religious Controversy. His birth is heralded by 3 kings. You should know that one of the things that happens before this date is that the 3 stars align and point to another star. The 3 kings follow a star in the east. That is when you know when this will actually occur. That is, you've heard that story. You just didn't know that they took it from you, African. You can't just take it back the same way they gave it to you. You don't think that they messed with it in 2,000 years? You can't just take it back the same way. Don't just wrap your Bible in kente cloth. It doesn't work that way. By the way, Heru is the one who spits on wounds which will heal. That's in the coffin text. Spell 1113. He's raised by a surrogate father. He's known as the King of Kings. Take a look at this stele here. Do you see this? This is in the Metropolitan Museum, not far from where we are right now. But you're actually going to see that every king had their name incised in this. This is usually called a sarek. Say sarek with me. And on top is Heru, because Heru is the king of kings. That is what you are seeing. By the way, if you need a citation for that, you have to get a bus ticket. He died and was resurrected. We see Heru dying and resurrecting. This is not far from here. Go look at what is generally called the Metternich stele. I don't have time to go through it extensively, but understand that Ast was traveling with her babe, looking for spaces to live, and she was told, she was routinely told, there's no room here. I know you thought you heard that story. I'm telling you the original. And then what happens? She actually finds that Heru is killed by his uncle. And so she calls to the heavens, speaks words into his ear, and he is resurrected. That's just one of the sacred resurrections we see, victory over death. I'm not going to even go into Asar right now. But that is called the Metternich stele. Okay, I don't have time to go through all of this. But I want you to understand that if we clearly look at Mary really quickly, understand that she is known as the mother of God, Mut Inter. Mut Inter. And for that, all you have to do is look at the first chapter of the Rebuttal and Ger, known as the Book of the Dead. It's all throughout the book. Giving you a citation would be like reading John in the telephone book. It's all throughout there. She is Mut Inter. She gives birth to a savior by a virgin birth. By the way, did you know that Ast and her sister were the beloved ones? The word for beloved, doubly beloved in the Kemetic language, is Mary. There were two Marys at the resurrection of Asar. This is a copy family, a poor copy. The things that you hear and that you love are actually the echo of something that your African foreparents gave you. In many ways, we're the same. But it's time to round off the edges. Go back to the source. Return to the original. That's it. And if you did that, you could still say you're Christian. By the way, there would be almost no difference between us. I'm not saying you can't be a Christian. I'm saying you can't be the Christian you've been. That's what I'm saying. Because as long as you do that, you continue to pay homage and give power to other people. By the way, you should know, that Easter actually moves, right? You know that, right? It's not on the same day every year. Why does it move? It's the first Sunday after the equinox. That's what happens. So you have to understand we're talking about a solar deity. And if you want to say that this actually happened, at the very least, you need to tell your church that not to change the date. But there are people who know this story, family, and they are trying to keep it from you. Well, I am here to tell you the truth. I am here to make sure that you hear this story, whether you're able to entirely receive it at this point. That's fine. That's fine. If we talk briefly about Asar, because you're going to see most of the connections in the story of Ast, Asar, and Heru. Obviously, you know that Asar was resurrected. I hope you know that. I hope you know that he was also a deity of bread and wine. I hope you know. No, you probably don't know that. Take a look at this. This device is actually in most Kemetic tombs. What they would do is have a plate of soil that looked like the Asar, and they'd put wheat in it and let it grow in the tomb. They would close it. That's why it looks like it has grass on it. You ever been to the health food store and saw wheatgrass? Something very similar. I could show you images of Asar having actually the grain grow to his nose. I don't have the time to do that. By the way, he actually says that the Kemetic tradition was very close to the Greek and Roman traditions. Yeah, that's just because they stole it earlier. This is the one thing I'll leave you with. This is actually Herodotus describing their tradition. He says, Melampos was the one that taught the Greeks the name of Dionysus. It was from him that the Greeks learned to bear the phallus in honor of Dionysus. I will not say that what is done in Egypt in connection with the god and what is done among the Greeks originated independently, for they would then be of a Hellenic character and not recently introduced. I want you to understand that Kemet, your African nation, why are you running from it? Your African nation actually influenced the world. That's what happened. And so if we want to be able to be powerful, we have to return to these stories once more. Peace.
All right. Thank you very much, Brother Jabari. So just a rebuttal. Just a lot of really great statements you're making. A lot of which I agree with, and just wanted to, in the rebuttal, address a few things and clarify a few things. So again, one of the things that has been said is, again, that I am ignoring that there was African Nasrawi violence. I think I've said numerous times today that there was Nasrawi African violence. And but I'll say it again. I'll say it again right now. There were people like Ezana and like King Silko of Kush who also accepted the Birsat and also inscribed an inscription that talks about his new belief in God, and also this is the first witness of Birsat coming into Kush, and who also is conquering people. So Ezana conquered people around Axum and also in Kush, and so did Kushite kings. Kushite kings were centered in Merowe, and they also conquered nomadic African people who lived apart from the Nile, and they were often called Blimmies by Nubian sources, and also Bega. So again, this was already happening, and there's evidence of that. You can look up the Silko inscription. It talks about Kushite violence happening even before the time of Birsat, when Kushites were still practicing traditional Kushite religion, right? But continuing on also into the time of Birsat entering into Kush and Ethiopia, there was violence. So I've never said that this was a bloodless entry of Birsat into these African civilizations. What I'm saying today is that that's not the totality of the story. Well, number one, what I'm saying, because it's being brought up quickly, is that there was examples of that where Christians enacted violence, and there were examples like in Egypt and other places where Christians were enacted upon with violence by people, practitioners of traditional religion. So there was violence going on in different directions, right? Not only a young student being beat by Egyptian practitioners, but also Egyptians being killed by the Roman Empire because of their faith in Christ. Perpetua and Felicity, who were North African Christian women who were put to death by the Roman Empire for their faith. So this was happening in different directions. But again, I'm addressing that, but also I want to point out again that violence in early religion is not the topic of today. So we need to make sure not to continue to get off topic, because the question being presented is Birsat a white man's religion? And up to this point, is it a copy of Kemetic religion? And again, what we've already taught. So again, another problem that's been pointed out, or that's been not addressed or taken account of, is again what I mentioned, the homily of Frumentius, which is an ancient Ge'ez manuscript in Analecta Bolandiana that specifically indicates that King Ezana was not a child being raised. So again, the story of Ezana being a child being taught Birsat by a person from Lebanon is actually from Roman sources. So when we repeat the story of Ezana being taught Christianity by an outsider as a child, we are actually repeating the Roman story. But this is not the African story. If we look at African sources, like this homily attributed to Frumentius, which was written in Ge'ez, an African language that's inherently Christian, predominantly Christian text, they themselves in their own story talk about how Izana was an adult. So again, this is not being taken account of. And also, in some of the evidence that was presented, where we talk about Justin Martyr and Augustine, who are referencing the parallels or the connections that they are drawing in their theology with traditional Roman religion and also with Birsat. Again, what I'd like to propose is that there may not be a full understanding that I was attempting to lay out from a Nasrawi perspective of how we view the relationship between our faith and our culture, ancestral culture and our traditions. And so when Justin Martyr or Augustine and these are early Roman theologians, but when most of these Nasrawi theologians talked about the correlations, they, and again, as I've demonstrated, they and also practitioners of traditional Egyptian religion or traditional Roman religion would not have seen that as a copy. In fact, what they were doing was they were attempting to demonstrate the connections between the Birsat and also traditional religion. But not to say that it's a copy, but again, from a Nasrawi perspective, Jesus is the fulfillment of various things. So from a Nasrawi perspective, if you see it from our perspective, when there are connections in Egyptian religion to Nasrawi theology or the Nasrawi scriptures, from our perspective, that is the commonality. We believe that God's presence is everywhere and is imprinted upon all people. So when and if there are commonalities, just like Justin Martyr and Clement of Alexandria and early theologians all over the early Christian world saw this as God revealing himself to people, pointing them towards Yeshua. And so this was not seen as, this would have not been seen as a copy. But Eusebius talks about this as the preparation for the gospel. And this is something that many of us believe in, that God is drawing himself to all people through these different commonalities. And also, I just wanted to point out a couple of things that were mentioned that were put out as commonalities between Kemetic and Birsat religion. Just wanted to point out that there's nothing in the Bible that says that there were 3 magi or people from the Persian Empire that came to visit Jesus. That's a tradition that was actually invented by white people, by European Christians. But that's not something that was ever, that's not in, the Bible doesn't say that there was 3. Just pointing that out. Also, there was a mention of another commonality that was put forth, I just wanted to respond to. There was a mention that the title of the King of Kings, again, as an alleged copy or commonality, this is a title that was used all over the ancient world, not only in Birsat, not only in Kemetic religion, and so therefore it can't be seen to be an imitation or a copy because this was the title of the Shah-un-Shah, the Lord of Lords, in the Persian Empire as well. And again, many of these commonalities can also be seen in other religions, and the point that I've already made, again, is that early people in the ancient world would often borrow from one another. And this didn't only happen. Yes, Kemet, Egypt, did very much influence other places, but it was also influenced itself. And that there were other gods and goddesses that were patronized, that were worshipped in Kemet, even not only before the time of Yeshua, but also even before the time of Roman influence in Egypt. Now, again, the point, that's first of all, I just want to back up before I finish that point and remind you again that when the Seleucids, when the Ptolemies show up in Egypt and begin to colonize Egypt, practitioners of traditional religion begin to deeply syncretize and blend their faith with Roman gods. And they begin to give way. Practitioners of Egyptian religion, the people that are being put forth as your ancestors, are actually people who sold out to Egyptian traditional religion. And and one of the quotes I didn't have time to show you was from Shenouda of Atrip. Also, there was a comment about you not knowing what Atrip is. I would just suggest look it up. It's a town in Egypt that today is called Sohag. But Shenouda of Atrip, which is in Upper Egypt, close to the Nile, near Pantopolis. He also, when he's arguing against Gesius, he talks about Gesius worshiping Kronos, and also quotes Gesius himself, who says he worships Kronos, which is a Greek god that Shenouda then attributes or associates with Petbe. So Gesius and other Egyptian folk were worshiping Petbe, an Egyptian god, and Kronos interchangeably. And the same thing was happening, for example, with the Canaanite goddess Anat. Anat was a goddess that was not from Egypt, but she was actually from the Syrian or Canaanite area. But there were many Syrians and Canaanites who lived in Egypt and established a community called Hyksos, and they created a temple there that's still around. And there are inscriptions and there are hieroglyphic worship to Anat. And she's even mentioned in the very text that talks about Horus and Isis, which is the contest between Horus and Seth. A foreign god, Anat, is mentioned. So just a few rebuttals. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let me say that he is, by the way, I'm enjoying this. You might not hear the other debates, I'm going to just call him and we're going to. But anyway, let me say that he did say that violence is not the topic for today. It's whether the Christian tradition actually is a white man's religion. And the reason why I brought up violence is because what I'm trying to say is, yes, there were Christians in Africa in very early stages. But what I'm saying is that those traditions were forced on them. That is what I'm saying. That's why the violence is key. He's making it sound like they just said, Pastor Mason's not here, I guess we Kemetic today. Pastor Mason's not here, I guess we're Muslim now. It doesn't work that way. People were killed. Violence was actually visited upon several communities. And if you understand what was happening in that manner, then you understand that, yes, you're going to see a Roman hand. Remember this direction, Rome to Egypt. By the way, when I say Egypt, you have to understand Egypt had 3,000 years of mastery before this happened. Sometimes people even say to me, well, why we fall so easily if we were so great? Every civilization falls. That is just the rule of history. No civilization lasts forever. Kemet was in its majesty for 3 millennia. So then understand that what we are actually talking about is something a little different. We're talking about the end of the period. Greece, Rome to Egypt, right? Egypt to Ethiopia, Ethiopia to Nubia. That's how Christianity takes hold on the continent. By the way, with all of this wonderful description of these followers on the continent, it's interesting that most of the followers on the continent today are still looking at a white Jesus. So listen, let me say something. I'm impassioned by the description of Christianity that he is giving. I would even donate to his church. But that is not Christianity. He is creating, rendering, carving something new. He even gave it his own name. Nobody calls it that. So I want you to understand that if he's going to do that, I'm going to support him. I may not agree with everything he's saying. I'm going to support him. If you are all in agreement with him, I will support you. Let's just not make it seem like it's the same thing that happened 2,000 years ago. And we'll rock together all day long. I mean, it's that simple. By the way, I know that we, earlier on, our good brother said that the Bible was the word of God. He said a few things, you cheered. I expected that. That's really, really good. But I want you to understand that as we talk about the Bible as the word of God, and I hate to show you something from Wikipedia. I really do. I was not actually able to get access to the internet in the first round. So what I'm gonna read is what the scholar says. Does that make sense? Well, if you don't get it, then you don't get it. But I want you to understand something. You will see, listen carefully. You will see that there are sections of the Bible that come from Kemetic text. And one of the best examples is in the book of Amenemope going into Proverbs. That's what you're seeing. And I want you to understand that when you look at the majority position, it says a major factor in determining a direction of influence is the date in which Amenemope was comprised at one time in the first millennia BCE, was put forward as a likely date for the composition of a Menemope. You're going to actually see so many similarities between a Menemope and the book of Proverbs that it makes many people uncomfortable. Just read it. These are some of the sections. For example, the Proverbs begins, incline thine ear and hear the words of the wise. It's hard to read it there. And apply thine heart to the doctrine. And Menemope begins, give thine ear and hear what I say, and apply thy heart to comprehend. On and on and on and on and on. You must understand that a Menemope is the origin of a large segment of the book of Proverbs. So are we saying that Kemet is the original and Christianity is a copy? Not a carbon copy, but a copy. Not a carbon copy, but a copy. And this is a really important thing for us to understand. Our brother says that preparation for that Eusebius calls those other people that had similar traditions, preparation for the gospel. That's another euphemism for actually murdering, destroying, and taking over civilizations. I will not allow you to use euphemisms. They were prepared for the gospel. It sounds similar. It sounds similar because you stole it and then said yours was a literal story, which people had problems with. That's why it sounds similar, preparation. You stole it. Let's acknowledge that and move forward. I also want us to understand that, as I say, our brother is describing, he's actually describing, here we go, you can see that. He's talking about a wonderful version of Christianity that inspires us. I'm inspired by it. But if he's going to actually do that, he's going to have to do some heavy editing first. Let's just talk about misogyny in the Bible. You should know that women in the Bible actually should adorn themselves in modest apparel and shamefacedness with sobriety, not braided hair, broided they say, braided hair. By the way, the sisters that have braids in here, you have to leave. You have to leave. Or gold, or pearls, or costly array. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor usurp authority over the man. You have to understand that this is what's happening here. And for Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Notwithstanding, she shall be saved in childbearing. What does that mean? It means, listen, women, sisters, your pains, your menstrual pains, your childbirth pains are payment because you followed the snake. This has to be some heavy editing. One of the reasons why the Christian tradition is not a direct copy of the Kemetic tradition is its problem with women. You have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge it. And what about if a woman is actually on her marital bed and her husband sees that she is not a virgin? First of all, the Bible says that he can hate her. And then if the parents cannot prove that she was a virgin, that means have the cloth with her blood on it, then she can be taken to her father's door and stoned to death because she sought to play the whore in her father's house. That is I'm not saying whore, your text says whore. And so I want you to understand that many of these things are in the Bible. By the way, I'm sometimes told, well, Jesus came forward and said, let ye who is without sin cast the first stone. That is corrective, I must admit. However, do you not give your members the whole text? How about you just give them the New Testament? We don't follow the old anymore. That had some messed up stuff in it. You give the whole thing. I even ask people, if that is incorrect, are you saying that Moses, who actually spoke that by his tongue in Deuteronomy, is Moses wrong? People start scratching. Tell me Moses is wrong and maybe we can actually agree on something. So that is something that does not happen. By the way, did you know that women's vows to God can be nullified by their husbands or their fathers? Did you know that? So there are so many, and let's even talk about a damsel who is actually raped by a man. If they are found out, by the way, it's very interesting that it says if they're found out. Because if they're not found out, then I guess it's no harm, no foul. I don't know. But if they are found out, then the man has to do what? Pay her father 50 shekels and make him his wife. Sisters in here, are you comfortable with being married to your rapist? Is that okay? That's in the text. Let's stop pretending that there's this new, wonderful, ancient African tradition. Because I bet you're still reading this. If you are still reading it, you cannot make that claim. And this is also why I will agree with you that the tradition that comes to you is not a carbon copy, because we don't see that in the Kemetic tradition. We see great homage for women. Every god has a goddess. And instead I see two dudes and a bird mostly making creation. I have to speak plainly here. Africans, wake up. It is time for you to return to the source and return to the forefront of civilization. You will not be able to do that as long as you are ensconced in someone else's tradition, the person that is seeking to subjugate you. By the way, let's say something very clear about this misogyny issue. If any of you have had a black mother or a black sister or a black wife, do you think that you could do this to them? When you run the world for thousands of years, you're not easily subjugated. So what I'm saying to you is that we have to return to that and allow our sisters to be either our equals or even above us. Dua. Thank you.
Time.